Hey guys, the objective of this tutorial is to cover the key concepts of chroma keying. The concepts that are universal whether you're keying in Fusion, like I'm doing here, because it's very powerful and it's free, part of DaVinci Resolve, or if you were doing it in Nuke, which is Visual Effects industry standard, or if you're doing it in After Effects, it doesn't matter. Keying is keying, and that's consistent across all software packages. And the misunderstandings that people have around it are also consistent across all software packages. So in this video, I just want to dip our toes in the water of what that is and see where that gets us. So it's not a step-by-step tutorial to keying in Fusion. It's covering ideas that are equally valid across all software. And also, I'm not going to be doing like a final composite here. So it's not going to be very sexy. It's going to be mundane but functional, just how I like it. And so let's start by doing what we know that we want to do with a keyer, which is chopping out this blue and then sticking in the background behind it. And this you can learn to do very, very quickly, even if you've never done visual effects before. And you would need what we'd call a keyer. So the most common keyer within Fusion is called the delta keyer, but different software packages will have different keyers and they will all do much the same thing. You can actually build your own if you're very familiar with how keyers work and what node-based compositing is, but that would be for a separate video. For now, I just have a keyer. Nothing's happened because I haven't chosen the color that I want to key. In choosing, as soon as I choose a color, you can see that certain areas will go this checkerboard, which means that they are transparent. So here I've selected a yellow color, so it's chopping out everything with yellow in it. Obviously, it's not what I want. I want to chop out blue, and boom, the blue is gone. And then over here, this node is merging those two together. So now you can see mission accomplished, right? If I take that out, this is just foreground over background with nothing chopped out. And then I stick my delta keyer in the middle. Boom, it's chopped out the blue, and we're there. And this is, if this was a tutorial on using the delta keyer, this is maybe where I would go into these options and start to tell you how to use these options to get a better result, but it's not that. This is where I want to talk about underlying concepts. And the first thing that we're seeing here is the delta keyer assumes that we want to chop out the blue. It's a good assumption, it's what I want to do. But from that, I think there's a whole bunch of other misunderstandings that kind of stem from that. Because keying is not necessarily about chopping things out, it's about controlling areas based off of their color. So if you want to get a better appreciation for what the keyer is doing, you're going to want to have a look at the alpha channel. So by default, digital images will store red, green, and blue channels, and by combining those, you can create all the other colors. But some images will also carry alpha channels, and in visual effects, we work with alpha channels a lot. And the alpha channel is basically just an extra channel that can be used as a mask. We often equate it with transparency, but alphas can be used for a billion different things. So if I go to the alpha channel, you can see this is showing me what the keyer is actually doing, right? That it's taking the blue areas and it's saying, okay, you go to black, and then the non-blue areas, you go to white, and then it's saying everything that's black, let's chop you out. Just as to reinforce the idea of what an alpha is, if I look at my foreground, right, before it was keyed, if I look at the alpha for that, it's completely white. It's saying, yeah, everything is solid here, you can't see through me. But then as we go along to the keyer, we can see that now the blue areas are becoming black, and it's saying, okay, chop those blue areas out. But you don't need to use keying to chop areas out. You can use that control for anything. So let's take a look at this ribbon, for example. What if I wanted that to be a different color? Well, that's based off of keying as well, because the ribbon is red. So what I'd want to do is to be able to grab hold of any red, but not chop it out, but change the color, right? So here, if I made another delta keyer and then feed my foreground into that. So here I'm looking at the alpha, I'm going to switch back to looking at the color, and then I'm going to pick my color, which is red, and you can see now everything that is slightly red is now becoming transparent, right? So that's affecting the ribbon, but also the pink feet, the pink nose, the ears, the pink flowers, it's going to be affecting a bunch of areas. And if we look at the alpha, which we really want to get in the habit of doing, we can see that the red ribbon is affected a lot more, but there are areas of red in many places, and then we can start to play with the keyer. This threshold option here is the most common one that you start to play with to try and isolate your color. And you can see here, one of the issues that I'm hitting straight away as I start to do that is I'm getting a mask for this upper portion of the ribbon, but not that lower portion of the ribbon, which is annoying, right? Because I want to control that whole ribbon, and I know that ribbon is all red. The problem is that through a phenomenon that we call color constancy, the human brain is very, very good at identifying the constancy of colors, essentially identifying the fact that this is red and this is equally red because it's the same red ribbon. However, if you don't know that, if you don't have prior knowledge of that, and you're literally just looking at the values, and up here in the top left of this viewer, I've got what's called a color inspector. And so that tells me the exact value of the colors. So if I go up here, you can see right underneath my cursor, it's saying that red is 0.5, right? 1 for red would mean it's maxed out the redness. You can't get any more red than that. So this is 0.5. So it's pretty red, but not very red, but it's looking red because there isn't much green or blue to counterbalance that. If you were putting in more green or more blue, then the colors would start to change. But here we've got 0.5 red, very, very little green, and a touch more blue. But as I go into the shadow area here, you can see that there's no green and no blue and just a touch of red. So that means that technically, yes, it's still red, but the numbers are very different to here, which means it's a very different color, which means that as far as the keyer is concerned, it doesn't want anything to do with it, because the whole point of a keyer is it's masking everything that is a consistent color. And this down here is not the same color as that up there. Doesn't help that you know it's red if the computer doesn't, or if the keyer doesn't, I should say. And so this is a problem that you're going to encounter all the time when you're chroma keying if you don't have nice flat blue screens or green screens or whatever they might be. So if I go back to the original here, you can see that actually this is pretty nice and flat, this blue screen. When you're lighting on set, what you want to do, if you can, it's not always possible, but if you can, you have a separate lighting setup for the blue screen. So this blue screen was 1.5 meters back away from the set, something like that. And it had a softbox screen left, softbox screen right. And there was a decent amount of time spent to try and make sure that it's as evenly lit as possible. I think it's slightly lighter on the right than the left. But you know, this is pretty nice, pretty flat. It's rare outside of studio conditions that you can get something that is that nice. And what that means is that you might have shaded areas of green or blue and then lit areas of green and blue, and you can tell as far as the key is concerned, they're not the same. So having a wrinkly green screen is going to give you those problems. Having shadows cast across them, it's going to give you those problems. So this is something you want to be aware of, and your brain is going to fight you, because your brain is going to know that's all blue, and you're going to be saying to the keyer, just grab the stuff that is blue, but the keyer is working with numerical values. It's not, it doesn't have the brain to know this is all the same blue. As far as the key is concerned, it's different blue or different green, exactly as we've seen in the ribbon down here. And you can start playing with your keyer and going, all right, fine, I want you to attack a large range of values, right? I want to get you to attack these reds and those reds. But the problem is, the bigger the range of values you tell the keyer to look for, the more areas it's going to find it across the image, and the more difficult it's going to be to control the area that you want to control. So this kind of ties into what I would say is like the #1 misconception about chroma keying, which is that there's any degree of magic to it, right? You just put blue or green on something and that means that magically visual effects happens, and it's not the case, you know, and oftentimes it's kind of fun to see people in like chroma suits, you know, green or blue suits or whatever, but it's fine. It can be really useful sometimes, but the problem is people are bendy and curvy and they cast shadows, meaning that you end up with this problem all the time. And so if there's one takeaway from this video, there's no magic to it, and that means we need to kind of get under the hood and start to understand what's going on here a little bit. But the other point that I'm making in parallel to that is going, chroma keying is not necessarily about chopping stuff out, it's about controlling things, right? So in this case, I haven't done a great job of isolating this ribbon, but let's say it's kind of good enough for now. And you only need to key the area that you're interested in. All the rest of it, like I don't need a key that's going to handle all those flowers amazingly well. No, I can just mask that off, right? Using a shape, what we'd call a roto shape, or a polygon mask. So here, actually, before I plug it in, let me draw it. So I'm just going to draw a mask around that bow and then plug that into there, right? So it's saying only worry about this area, not about the rest. That's not a small thing that I did just then. That's very, very important in keying, that you're not interested in the whole area. So let me loop back, and then I'm going to come back to this bow, but let's come back to our original plate. You can see here in the background, we've got these, they're just bits of tape, right? I can call them tracking markers if I want to sound sophisticated, and you can buy professional tracking markers, but ultimately a tracking marker is just a mark that is used for tracking. That's a whole different conversation, what tracking is. There are many things that you can track. In this case, the reason they're there is for us to be able to track the movement of the camera. The problem that we have as we're keying, so let's jump across to this delta keyer, is of course they're not blue, so the keyer isn't going to catch them. But that's fine. We're only interested in keying this complex area, right? The area where the foreground meets the background, that's what I don't want to have to rotoscope. Sometimes you do, if you don't have a blue screen behind or a green screen behind, you've got to just rotoscope that, right? Draw shapes around all of that stuff, and you can see how painful that would be. But luckily we have blue screen behind there, so we don't need to worry about that. The rest we can just mask off, right? So I can just go through here, have a nice big mask for everywhere that doesn't touch that area, and then boom. I probably want to invert that mask. No, sorry, I want to plug it into what is called the garbage mat here. I don't want to get into any details really, but that basically, garbage mats are used to throw things into garbage, throw them away. So you can see that allows me to control things like that very easily. So the keyer is only for areas that you can't chop out easily. Now, if you're an idiot, then you might do something like I did here, right? And you have a tracking marker that is behind the foreground. So in this case, I can't key it out. Do you know what I could if you're getting really fancy? There is a chance that I could do what's called luma keying, which is keying based off of the luminance, the lightness or darkness of a thing. But whatever, that's a technical thing. So here, what you'd have to do, unless you were trying to be fancy, is you would have to literally draw a shape around all of that to remove it. So like I say, that's an area that if you were smarter than me, you would look to avoid. It's not always avoidable though. You know, it's quite common that, especially if there's a complex camera movement, that you're not going to be able to get tracking markers in areas that can just be easily garbage matted out, in which case, yeah, you're going to have to get into some complexity there. But I digress. The point that I want to make is that when we're talking about keying, we're only really concerned about the areas that we want to key. The rest should be easily controllable. So let's come back to our ribbon through here, and we've already masked off everything except the area that we want to control. And there's one thing that I don't want to go deep into here, but notice how my keyer has actually changed the color of that, which is not what I wanted, right? So this is something worth thinking about. And it comes back to this idea that keying is not about chopping stuff out. Keying is about three different things. Yes, one is controlling an area, which might mean chopping it out. Then two is, if you do chop it out, is how you handle the edges. And then three is, how do you handle the spill, the blue or the green that might be bouncing onto your set and act. And your keyer, especially if you've got a good one like the delta keyer here, it's trying to be really clever, and it's trying to handle my spill at the same time, and it's getting confused because it's not expecting me to be aggressively keying out this red through here. And this is one reason why I wanted to make this video, because the keyer is trying to be helpful, and it's trying to do stuff behind the scenes. And ultimately, that might be a hindrance. And I think as we move towards, AI and visual effects and things like that, there's going to be more and more that happens behind the scenes, and that's going to be really powerful and really useful. But I think it's going to make it even more important that you understand what it's trying to do. So this takes us to one of the key ways that I would recommend working with the keyer, which is not just letting it do its thing, but instead going, I want you to make a mask, and just using the mask, right? So for example, if I wanted to change the color of this bow through there, then I can put in a color correct node. So I haven't done anything, right? So the color's not going to change. Now I can start to correct the color, and that's affecting everything. But if I look at my keyer and I look at the alpha, then I can go, this is a mask that the keyer is making. And I can use that mask to chop things out. That's what it's doing by default. But I can just use it to control pretty much whatever I want. Right? So here I'm going to plug that mask into the color corrector. And okay, what it's doing is it's saying affect everywhere that's white and don't affect things that are black. So it's doing the opposite of what I want. But I can just say invert that mask. And so now I'm using that key not to chop things out, but to change the color of something. So the thing that I'm driving at here is just getting you to understand that first step of keying. The thing that I want to focus on in this video is not chopping things out, but controlling areas based off of their chroma. And one way of controlling is that you chop it out. Another way is doing whatever the hell you want, right? And if I go to the color tab here, this is a mess because I played with this before doing the video. So let me just start this again. Okay, so if I go to the color tab, this is the area within Resolve where you do the grade, where a colorist would work. So all the options here are for playing with the exposure and the color and things like that, right? So it's very, very common for a colorist to use the qualifier, which would be this tool through here. And then, for example, I can pick green here. So what it's done now is it's just generated a mask based off of everything that's green. And then I can go, okay, I want all my green stuff to be darker, or I want it to be less green, right? Because I don't know, it's all dyed or whatever, or much more green because I want it to be, this cutesy, playful sort of thing. Incredibly common, right? And so this isn't using green screens or blue screens. Like, I could do the same with the flowers. Let me make another node, and then I'm going to sample the flowers. So you can see I'm selecting everything that's got that yellow within it, and now I can start to change the color of those flowers, right? Very, very common in grading. All of that to say, that's what keying is. It's using the chroma of a thing, the saturation of a color, to control it in some way. So with that in mind, if we jump back here and we go, let me just kill that color correct for a minute. I'm going to control P on that to kill that. Look at what we have here from my initial key. I want to just go a tiny bit further in talking about the potential ramifications of that. So, well, firstly, you can see I've, if we step through what I've done here, I've got my foreground, and then I've keyed it out, I've keyed the blue out, and then I've merged that on top of the background. But potentially what I want to do instead is, let me just try and keep this simple so you can see what I'm doing. I have my foreground merged over my background, and instead of putting the keyer in the middle of that, I'm using the keyer as a mask. Why? It's not that necessary, but what I'm doing here is I'm kind of respecting this stage of the process, that all I'm focused on here is generating a mask, and then I can use that mask to control things as I want. And that means that I'm stopping the keyer doing other things like trying to control the edges or trying to control my spill. Because ultimately what you want to do is control all those things separately yourself and understand what's going on beneath the hood. That's the whole point that we're driving at here. So the fundamental thing that I want to be thinking about with this keyer is that I'm just using it to generate a mask. Now, as I look into that mask, you can see that I'm hitting some problems. There's a problem of noise, for example, but then there's also this problem of the fact that it's not pure white everywhere where I want it to be pure white, right? Like all of this is great. It means that those areas aren't going to be see-through, but look, there's little areas that are gray, and that means that if black means it's getting fully masked, fully chopped out in this case, and white means it's not, gray means it partially is. So you can see what's happening there. If I look at my original foreground, you look at that flower, lavender, I guess, and then you look at it after it's keyed, and it's getting chopped out because that lavender flower has blue in it. So what do you do about that? Well, one is you could not be an idiot and not have a blue-ish flower on top of a blue background. That would remove that problem, but you're always going to hit problems like this. So this is the other thing that I want to touch on. Not, again, going in depth with how we control that. There are a bunch of / limited amount of options that we have for controlling that, and our number one go-to is normally playing with the threshold. So you can see as soon as I start to play with this, I can pull out a lot of the noise of the blacks that's in the blacks quite quickly, and you can see the effect that's having. So that's nice, that's desirable. And you can see, okay, I'm still having a bit of a problem here, so I'll just keep on pushing that further, pushing it further, and now we're left with a pretty clean background, but we still have this ugly edge. Edge control is a completely separate conversation that I want to talk about in a separate video. The point that I want to get to here is just that as I've started playing with that threshold, I'm starting to lose some details in my fur. You see that? And the more aggressive I go, the cleaner my background gets, but the more of those nuances that I lose. And you can see as I've pushed that, not only have I lost nuance within the fur, my lavender plants are now getting totally decimated. And if I want my lavender plants to be solid white, then I might pull the threshold from the other direction. You can see as we look at the alpha, the more I push that, the more that white gets filled in. And so now we're at a point where that lavender is now not transparent at all. But our noise is pretty horrific. Okay, so then to kill the noise, we start to pull that threshold up. But you can see it's not working anywhere near as nicely here as it was before, and we can keep on pushing that, but at some point we get to a point where we just can't push any further. And so this is the point that I want to finish on, which is that in a lot of situations, you're just wrong if you think that you can just plug in a keyer and it's going to work. What you may well find is it's going to work well for some areas and not for others. And you would certainly find this if our foreground was not so evenly lit, and we had it very light on one side and very dark on the other, then you would find the keyer that works in the light areas is not going to work as well for the dark areas, and vice versa. So when you're lighting your set, you want to do whatever you can to mitigate this, but when you're outdoors, it's often unavoidable. Shadows of actors might get cast across it and whatever. So ultimately, what you would aim to do is to go, well, look, my delta keyer is only here to generate a mask. So what you can do is focus on a mask that works well for one area, and then another mask that works well for another area, and another mask that works well for another area, and then you start to combine those. So this idea, well, green screens aren't magic, right? I find myself saying that a lot, and it will soon be one button click. I know, because that's the direction that the industry is going. But I want you guys to know what's happening underneath that button click, so that you can resolve it in situations where you need to have a deeper level of understanding. And ultimately, chroma keying is just controlling an area based off of its color. So as that color changes in different ways, you may want different keyers to control that. You're also going to find that you probably want to combine it with roto shapes for specific areas that just aren't working. So for example, that was an area that we called out where you just go, okay, you're going to roto that. Ideally, you wouldn't have roto shapes for each one of those flowers, but you could, right? Those flowers we're getting, if I change my threshold back, you can see that those flowers are getting transparent. One way that you can control that is just having a shape there to make that solid on the inside. Problem is that then as the flower starts to move in the wind or whatever's happening, then you've got to do a lot of animation work to get that shape to follow it. one of you guys is there thinking, yeah, but could you track off a point and have the shape follow that point that you're tracking? Yeah, you probably could. But the point is that when we're talking about chroma keying, it's very, very rarely a one-click solution, and that it will often be a combination of keys and potentially a combination of roto shapes. Ultimately, because roto is much more work than keying, if you can key it, then you should, and then you use roto as a backup. Something like, his eyes being blue, obviously the eyes in the final thing are replaced by digital eyes, so I don't need to worry about keying those out necessarily, but if I did want those to be not affected by the keyer, then it's very, very easy, because I can just draw a shape around there, and that blue isn't touching any other blue, so I can just section that off and go, okay, I don't want you affected. Because like we touched on before, anywhere that isn't close to that edge that you want to control is going to be ultimately quite easy to work with. So that's it. There is no secret to chroma keying, other than it's about controlling these three things. One is your mask, that's what we've covered here. The second thing is the fringe. The third thing is the spill. If you're doing your first ever day of visual effects, that is just as relevant as if you're a 20-year industry veteran. It's still those three things, but if you've been doing it for 20 years, you probably have a few more tools and tricks in the bag for working with those three things. But for now, I'll leave it there. Strikes me now that I've finished this would work nicely maybe with a step-by-step tutorial going, okay, how would we do this specifically for this shot, right? So yeah, if you want, then maybe I'll cover that as well. I'd also like to cover these two missing elements of keying that we haven't covered here, the controlling of the edges, controlling of the spill. So we'll look at that another time. But for now, that's it. Thank you, guys.